The hero of the criminal empire, the conqueror of the city with blood and money. But tonight, his own wife will bring it all down. Celeste Arden lived alongside that devil for 7 years, believing herself queen. But the truth? She was merely the key Roman Viscari needed to unlock the Arden family's safe. Their anniversary night, a night that should have been for love, will become the night Roman loses everything. Like this post if you want to see the traitor get his deserved end. And comment the name of the city you're watching in. I want to know how far this story has come. The morning of the anniversary party, Celeste Viscari stood at the window of the master suite on the 3rd floor of the family estate and watched 24 workers string white lights through the oak trees below. It was barely past 7. The caterers had arrived at 6, and she had heard them through the floor. The clink of glassware, the thud of cases being stacked, the low bark of the head steward giving orders in the courtyard. The estate had been moving since before dawn, a machine warming itself up, and Celeste had not slept. She pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and kept her eyes on the trees. 7 years. That was the number she kept returning to. 7 years of this house, this name, this life. 7 years of standing beside Roman Viscari at events exactly like the one being assembled below her feet. She had learned in that time how to read a room by the way men held their shoulders when he walked in. She had learned how to smile at women who despised her and how to pour wine for men she was certain had killed people. She had learned the particular silence that fell over a dinner table when Roman decided he was done talking, which meant everyone was done talking, which meant the evening was finished whether anyone had touched their dessert or not. She had learned all of it, and she had told herself for a long time that learning was the same thing as belonging. The door behind her opened without a knock. That alone told her who it was. "You're up early." Vivian Cross dropped into the armchair by the vanity table with the ease of someone who had been walking into this room uninvited for the better part of 20 years. She was dark-haired and sharp-featured, and currently wearing the kind of expression that meant she had already seen something that morning and was deciding how to say it. "The florist is having a crisis downstairs. Something about the wrong shade of ivory for the centerpieces. Tell Marco to handle it." Marco is handling the security walkthrough. There are 6 new faces on the gate detail, and he's not comfortable with any of them. Celeste turned from the window. "Roman hire them?" "Through Caruso. They cleared background." Vivian watched her. "You didn't sleep." "I slept." "Celeste." "A few hours." She moved to the vanity and sat, and Vivian was quiet while she worked through the motions of getting dressed. The moisturizer, the setting of the foundation, the mechanical precision of it. The face she put on in the morning was not so different from the face she put on for parties. It had taken her years to understand that this was a problem. "Roman was up before you," Vivian said after a moment. "He has calls in the morning." This was different. He went down to the garden at 5:30, alone. Celeste set down the brush. She looked at Vivian in the mirror. "You were watching." "I was getting water." Vivian met her eyes in the reflection. "I'm just telling you what I saw." Celeste said nothing. She picked up the brush again. The estate grounds covered 11 acres at the edge of the city, far enough from the center that you couldn't hear traffic, close enough that Roman could be back in his office within 20 minutes when something required his personal attention, which was frequently. The house itself was 3 stories of pale limestone and iron-framed glass, built in a style that suggested old European money, even though Roman's money was neither old nor European. He had purchased the property 4 years into their marriage and had the interior gutted and redesigned twice before he was satisfied. Celeste had been consulted on the aesthetic choices, which meant she had been shown 3 options for each decision and told to pick one, and Roman had then overridden 2 of her selections because he preferred the darker palette. She had stopped being surprised by this. She finished her face and stood, and Vivian stood with her. "Tonight's going to be a long night," Celeste said. "They always are." "I need you close." Vivian's expression didn't change. "Where else would I be?" The day moved in the grinding, relentless way that event days always did, a series of small crises that required her presence, her signature on catering decisions, her judgment on seating arrangements, her ability to stand in 3 different places simultaneously and appear unhurried in all of them. By noon, 140 chairs had been arranged around tables in the East Garden, and the florist had resolved the ivory dispute by replacing all the centerpieces with a deeper cream that Celeste actually preferred, though she didn't say so. By 2 in the afternoon, the first security convoy arrived carrying guests from out of the city, men whose names she recognized from Roman's briefings, names that appeared in legal documents and financial filings, and she suspected in certain federal databases as well. Roman appeared at 3, freshly suited, and kissed her cheek at the foot of the main stairs in full view of the household staff. "You look beautiful," he said. He smelled of cedar and something underneath it that she had never been able to name. He was 43 and looked, to anyone who didn't know him well, like a man in the uncomplicated prime of his life. Broad shoulders, jaw that had sharpened with age rather than softened, gray at his temples that the tabloids always described as distinguished. He had a quality that Celeste had once found magnetic and now found exhausting, which was that he was always, in every situation, precisely as composed as the situation demanded. She had never once seen him rattled. She used to believe this meant he was strong. She had revised that interpretation. "Thank you," she said. "Everything in order?" "The florist had a crisis. It's resolved." He nodded, already moving his attention past her to the 2 men who had come down the stairs behind her. His attention was like a spotlight that way. Brilliant while it was on you, total darkness the moment it swung away. She had learned not to watch it go. She smiled. He smiled back. They had been doing this particular performance for long enough that it required almost no conscious effort from either of them. At 4:15, she went looking for the evening's menu card to approve a last-minute substitution that the kitchen had requested. The north corridor of the second floor was quiet at that hour. The staff were below, and the guests were in their rooms resting before the evening, and Roman was in his study. She could hear him through the study door before she reached it. She wasn't trying to listen. That was the thing she would return to later, in the long hours after this night was over. She hadn't been looking for anything. She had just been walking down a corridor in her own house carrying a piece of paper about a fish course substitution. His voice was low, the way it got when he was on a personal call rather than a business call. She recognized the register of it. "Not much longer. I told you that." A pause. The sound of him moving. "After tonight, it's formalized. The financial structure goes through the Arden accounts by the end of the quarter." Another pause. Longer. "I know it's been difficult. I know 3 more months and we don't have to be careful anymore." Celeste had stopped walking. She was standing 6 feet from the study door with her hand still holding the menu card, and she was breathing through her mouth because her nose had gone cold. "She doesn't know anything." His voice was flat, certain, the voice he used when he was stating a fact he considered beyond dispute. "She never has. That's why this works." She heard him laugh, then a quiet, private laugh, intimate in a way that she had not heard him be intimate with her in longer than she wanted to count. "Tell me again," he said, to whoever was on the other end. "Tell me how it's going to be." She turned and walked back the way she had come. She did not run. She did not make noise. She moved down the corridor with her shoulders level and her face blank and the menu card still in her hand, and she counted her steps because counting was something to do with her mind, while the rest of her tried to process what her body already understood. She made it to the small sitting room at the end of the east wing before her legs went. She sat down on the edge of the window bench and put both hands flat on her thighs and made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The view from this window was the driveway and the gate, and she could see 2 of the new security men standing at their post, talking to each other. Normal. Everything was normal. The world was exactly as it had been 20 minutes ago. She was not exactly as she had been 20 minutes ago. She did not know how long she sat there before the door opened. When she looked up, it was Vivian, and Vivian looked at her face and immediately closed the door behind her and crossed the room without a word. "Tell me," Vivian said. So Celeste told her. She told it flatly, the way she had described things to herself during the walk down the corridor. Just the facts, just what she had heard, no interpretation beyond what the words themselves demanded. Vivian listened without interrupting, which was not Vivian's natural state. When Celeste finished, the room was very quiet. "How long?" Vivian said. Not a question, exactly. More like she was testing the weight of it. "I don't know." "Your instinct." Celeste looked at the window. "Long." Vivian sat back. She was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant she was solving a problem, not processing an emotion. Celeste had always loved this about her, the ability to move directly from received information to architecture, the way a mind could separate feeling from function when it needed to. Vivian had grown up with Celeste, had been in the room for every significant event of her adult life, and had never once responded to a crisis by dissolving. She had always just started building the next step. "He said the financial structure goes through the Arden accounts," Vivian said. "End of the quarter, that's what he said." "Which means he's been building toward this. Tonight isn't just the anniversary party." "No. Tonight is a consolidation event. He's gathering everyone who matters to him in one place and presenting the marriage as a fait accompli, a signal to both families that the Arden Financial Network and the Vescary Syndicate are permanently unified." Vivian's voice was controlled, clinical. "Once that's formalized, he doesn't need the marriage anymore. He needs the money." Celeste nodded. She was still looking at the window. "He's going to divorce you." "Probably. After the quarter closes, once the accounts are restructured in his favor." "That's my read." Vivian was quiet for another moment. "Your father doesn't know. My father thinks Roman is exactly what he presented himself to be." Celeste finally looked at her. "An ambitious man who wanted to consolidate power through the right marriage. Papa respected that. He thought it was straightforward." "It was straightforward, just not in the direction he thought." "No." The house hummed around them, the sound of the preparation machinery below, the distant thump of something being moved in the ballroom, the murmur of voices from the garden. In 4 hours, 140 people would be seated at those tables. Politicians, CEOs, mafia bosses from 4 different families. Men who had built their reputations on reading power correctly, on knowing which direction the wind was blowing before the weather changed. They would all be here, in this house, watching Roman Vescari toast to loyalty and family. "I need to get into his study," Vivian said. Celeste looked at her. "He documents everything. You know that about him. He keeps recordings of sensitive conversations because he doesn't trust memory and he doesn't trust paper. It's all encrypted, but I know where the backup drives are. I've seen them." Vivian's voice was even. "If I can get into that room in the next 2 hours, before the guests start arriving and the security tightens..." "Vivian, I know what I'm saying. If he catches you in there, he won't catch me." She stood. "I need 20 minutes, and I need you to keep Marco occupied with something that requires your attention on the other side of the house." Celeste stood too. She was taller than Vivian by 2 inches, and in this moment she felt the full weight of what they were deciding, the specific gravity of a door being opened that could not be closed again. She thought about the man she had married, not the public version, not the Roman who kissed her cheek in front of the household staff and said she looked beautiful. The other one. The one she had glimpsed through a door while holding a piece of paper about a fish course. She thought about 7 years. "Go," she said. She found Marco in the security briefing room off the main entrance and gave him a detailed, entirely fabricated concern about the access protocol for the North Gate, which required him to walk her through the plan personally. Marco Farini had been with the Vescari organization for 11 years and was constitutionally incapable of delegating when someone above his pay grade expressed a concern. He took her to the North Gate himself and walked her through every checkpoint, and Celeste asked methodical, unhurried questions and kept her face in the expression of a woman who had a lot invested in the evening going smoothly, which was true. She was at the North Gate for 31 minutes. When she returned to the house, Vivian was in the upstairs sitting room with her hands in her lap and a small gray drive on the cushion beside her. Celeste sat down. Vivian said, "There are 6 audio files, possibly more on the main drive, but I couldn't access that. The 6 I have go back 8 months. 2 of them are long. They sound like planning conversations." She paused. "And one of them is from 4 nights ago." "4 nights ago, we were at the Meridian dinner." "I know." Celeste looked at the drive. "Have you listened?" "Enough." Vivian's voice, for the first time since the sitting room, had something underneath it that was not clinical. He's been seeing her for 2 years, Celeste. At least. Her name is Renata. She's from the Ferraro family, the Milan branch. It's not just... She stopped. It's not just a transaction. He sounds like a different person with her. The word landed with a particular kind of weight that Celeste hadn't prepared for. She had been managing the practical reality of the situation, the financial scheme, the timeline, the evidence, and she had been keeping the personal reality at arm's length, the way you keep a source of heat at a distance that allows you to function. The word different reached past her preparation and caught something that she had been protecting without admitting she was protecting it. She breathed through her nose. She picked up the drive and closed her hand around it. "I need to tell my father," she said. "I know." "Before the party." "Yes." She stood and set the drive on the vanity table. She checked her reflection, not because she needed to adjust anything, but because she needed to look at herself and confirm that she was still there, still intact, still the person standing on the other side of this particular threshold. Her face looked back at her. The makeup she had applied that morning with mechanical precision. The dress she had chosen because it was the right color for this kind of evening. The earrings Roman had given her on their 3rd anniversary, which she was still wearing because she hadn't thought to change them and because some habits are deeper than decisions. She took the earrings off and set them on the vanity beside the drive. "There's something else," Vivian said. Celeste paused. "One of the files, the longest one, from 6 months ago, he goes into detail about the Arden account specifically. Which lines of credit, which holding structures, which trustees he's already approached." Vivian was watching her carefully. "He's been talking to 2 of your father's people, Celeste. Not just planning around them. Talking to them." The room went still. "Which 2? Vivian told her. Celeste stood for a moment with that information. She turned it over, examined it, felt the specific texture of it, the way it changed the shape of everything she had been assembling in the last 2 hours. Then she nodded, once, like a woman setting something in concrete. "All right," she said. "Get dressed and stay close to me tonight. Whatever happens, whatever he says, wherever he moves, I need you in the room. I'll be in the room. And Vivian," she turned from the mirror, "don't let anyone see the drive until I tell you." Vivian picked up the drive and looked at it with an expression Celeste couldn't entirely read, something between controlled fury and something older than fury, the expression of a woman who has been watching a wrong thing happen from too close a distance for too long. "He has no idea," Vivian said. Celeste moved toward the door. Her shoulders were level, her hands were steady. Below the window, she could hear the first cars coming through the gate, the guests arriving as the sun dropped toward the horizon, and the white lights in the oak trees began to mean something against the darkening sky. "No," she said. "He doesn't." She opened the door and walked out into the corridor and down the stairs toward the sound of a party that Roman Vescari believed was his. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom was full, and Roman was in his element. She watched him from across the room, the way he moved through the crowd, the way he let men come to him rather than going to them, the particular physics of his authority, the way a room organized itself around the fact of him. She had watched him do this at 100 events. She had always watched from close beside him, near enough that she was part of the gravity, part of the image he projected. Tonight she watched from the edge. He found her twice in the first hour and brought her into his orbit each time, his hand at the small of her back, his introduction of her to people she'd already met, as if the introduction were a gift he was giving her. She smiled. She said the appropriate things. She felt his hand on her back and thought about a voice behind a closed door saying she never has. That's why this works. At 8:40, her father arrived at her elbow. Matteo Arden was 67 years old and had been running the Arden family's financial network since before Celeste was born. He was a compact, quiet man who wore his suits like armor and listened to people the way a linguist listens to a new language, with total attention, absorbing everything, betraying nothing. He had built the most secure private financial infrastructure in the region's criminal economy, and he had done it by never once acting on incomplete information. "You need to walk with me," she said, very quietly, the words disappearing under the noise of the room. He looked at her face. He set down his glass. They walked together through the French doors at the east end of the ballroom, out to the stone terrace that ran the length of the house, where two of her father's personal security detail were stationed and where, for the moment, they were alone. She told him everything. It took 12 minutes. She watched his face as she spoke. He listened the way he always listened, completely still, eyes tracking her without moving from her face. And when she was finished, he was quiet for a very long time. "The two names," he said. She repeated them. Something moved behind his eyes that she had very rarely seen, not anger, or not only anger. Something closer to the feeling of having miscalculated, which for Matteo Arden was the most serious and the most personal kind of wound. "The drive," he said. "Vivian has it." "Is it enough?" Celeste considered the question. She had been turning it over since she first heard Roman's voice through that study door. The question of what enough meant in a room full of people whose entire professional survival depended on their ability to correctly read where power was and where it was going. In a court of law, the recordings would have been enough for almost anything. In a ballroom full of mafia bosses, they required something different. They required the absence of any possible alternative interpretation. "Yes," she said, "it's enough." Matteo was quiet for another moment. Then he asked the question she had been waiting for since she started talking. "What do you want to do?" She looked through the French doors at the lit interior of the ballroom, the crowd, the lights, the sound of a string quartet playing something elegant and forgettable in the corner. She could see Roman from here, standing with a group of men she recognized, his glass raised in some small preliminary toast, his face carrying that expression she had once found magnetic and now found unbearable. She had spent the entire afternoon thinking about the alternatives. She had made herself go through each one honestly. She could go quietly, let the evening proceed, let Vivian's recordings become leverage in a private negotiation, let Roman believe the situation was resolved on terms he'd accepted. Clean, private. No wreckage beyond what had already been done. She had considered it for about 40 minutes before she rejected it. Because the problem with going quietly was that it solved only the personal injury. It left the financial structure partially intact. It left his credibility intact. It left the two names her father had just heard standing in their positions. And it left every person in that ballroom with the impression that Roman Vescari's marriage was exactly what he had always presented it as. A union of strength, a consolidation of power, the kind of partnership that legitimate and illegitimate worlds alike recognized as unbreakable. If that story survived tonight, even Celeste's survival wouldn't fully change what it meant. "I want to wait," she said, "until he gives the toast." Her father looked at her. "He always gives a toast at these events. Something about family and loyalty. He never misses it." She turned from the window. "I want to let him get to the end of it. I want him standing in front of all of them, with his glass in the air, on the word loyalty." Matteo studied her face for a long moment. In the 42 years he had been her father, she had given him many reasons to be proud of her, and also several reasons to worry. She recognized this moment as possibly both. "And then?" he said. "And then I'm going to answer him." The string quartet shifted to something with a minor chord running underneath, and the sound drifted through the French doors and dissolved in the night air. Matteo Arden looked at his daughter for another few seconds. Then he nodded, once, in the particular way of a man who has evaluated a strategy and found it not only sound, but necessary. He picked up his glass from the terrace railing. "I'll be in the front," he said. "I know you will." She watched him go back inside. She stood on the terrace for a moment longer, alone, breathing the night air, feeling the cold of it move through the thin fabric of her dress. The lights in the oak trees were very beautiful from out here. Someone had done a good job with them. She made a mental note to tell the crew and immediately recognized the absurdity of that thought and let it go. She straightened her shoulders and walked back through the French doors into the light and the noise and the crowd, and found her place beside her husband and smiled at the right people and waited. She found her place beside her husband at 9:10, and the party was at full pressure now, the kind of density that a room reaches when everyone in it is performing for everyone else. And the alcohol has been flowing long enough that the performances have started to feel like truth. The string quartet had given way to a pianist in the corner, something low and textured that sat under the conversation without interrupting it, and the chandeliers above the ballroom floor threw a light that was warm enough to make everything look like it was already being remembered. Roman had his hand at her waist. Not the small of her back this time, the waist, which was possessive in a way the back was not. A gesture that said mine to anyone reading the room. She could feel the weight of his fingers through the fabric of her dress, and she kept her face open and pleasant and let herself be guided through a conversation with a man named Falcone, who ran port operations out of the southern coast, and whose wife had recently had a baby that Falcone described as the greatest thing that had ever happened to him, which Celeste did not doubt. She listened to Falcone talk about the baby. She asked the right questions. She watched Roman from her peripheral vision the entire time. He was working. Even in the midst of what should have been a celebration of his marriage, he was working. She could see it in the way his eyes moved across the room, cataloging, assessing, always running the secondary calculation underneath whatever conversation his mouth was engaged in. She had always known this about him. She had once told herself it was a quality she admired, that efficiency of attention, that refusal to let any moment go unmanaged. She understood now that what she had admired was the surface of something that had nothing to do with her. Falcone moved on. Roman leaned close to her ear. "You're quiet tonight." "It's a loud room," she said. He pulled back enough to look at her. His eyes moved across her face with the same cataloging quality they moved across everything else. And for a moment she felt the specific cold of being read by someone who was very good at it. She held his gaze and kept her expression at exactly the temperature she wanted it. Warm enough to be plausible, contained enough to give him nothing. "You look tired," he said. "I've been managing your party since 6 this morning." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The acknowledgement of a point. "After tonight," he said, "we'll get away somewhere, just the two of us. You deserve a break." The word deserve landed in a specific place and stayed there. "That sounds nice," she said. He kissed her temple and moved toward a cluster of men near the bar, and Celeste watched him go in thought, with a clarity that surprised her by how clean it was. "After tonight, you won't be making any more plans." Vivian materialized at her left shoulder at 9:30 with a glass of sparkling water and an expression of total social composure that Celeste recognized as the most dangerous thing Vivian was capable of. "Caruso's watching you," Vivian said, without moving her mouth more than necessary. "He's been on you since you came back inside." Celeste accepted the water. She did not look toward Caruso. "Where is he?" 7 o'clock, near the east pillar. "He's talking to Greco, but he's not listening to Greco." Dante Caruso was Roman's second, had been for 9 years, had built the northern operation from a collection of competing interests into something that functioned like an actual organization. He was not a man who watched things casually. If Caruso was watching her, it was because something had prompted him to. "Did he see you come out of the corridor?" Celeste said. "I don't know. Possibly." A pause. The timing would fit. "Does he know what's on the drive?" "He knows the drive exists. He's one of the people Roman would have trusted with that location." Vivian took a sip of her own drink, which means, "He knows I took something." Celeste let a beat pass. She smiled at a woman across the room who caught her eye. The wife of one of the financial men, a pleasant woman whose name she always forgot and always felt guilty for forgetting. The woman smiled back. "How close is he to Roman tonight?" Celeste said. "Close. They've talked 3 times since 8. Then he's already told him." Another beat. "Probably," Vivian said, which meant Roman knew, or suspected, or was in the process of assembling the information into something actionable. She let herself feel the specific weight of that for exactly 2 seconds, and then she set it aside, the way you set aside a complication that changes the timeline, but not the destination. "Stay near me," she said. "Don't go anywhere alone." Already wasn't planning to. Roman found her again at 9:50, and this time there was something different in the way he approached. She caught it from across the room before he reached her, something in the set of his jaw that he was controlling but not quite controlling enough. The way a man looks when he has received information and is deciding how to use it before he's fully decided. He came to her side and put his arm around her shoulders, which was a different gesture than the waist. Broader, more encompassing, the gesture of a man establishing perimeter. "Walk with me," he said. and his voice was smooth and his hand on her shoulder was steady, and there was nothing in either that she could have pointed to as wrong. But she had spent 7 years learning the difference between his public voice and the one that appeared in the gap between words, and what she heard in that gap now was not the easy authority of a man in command of his evening. It was calculation moving faster than usual. "I was just about to check on the kitchen timing," she said. "It can wait." "Roman, Celeste." He said her name quietly, and the quietness of it was the warning. "Walk with me." She went with him. He steered her through the crowd with his arm across her shoulders, nodding to people as they passed, and to anyone watching it looked like a husband and wife moving through their own party together, which was exactly what it was supposed to look like. He moved her toward the corridor that ran behind the ballroom, which was quieter, and then through a side door into the small anteroom off the main hall, where the noise of the party dropped to a muffled pressure behind the walls. He closed the door. She turned to face him. She kept her chin level and her breathing even and her hands still at her sides. "What's on the drive?" he said. No preamble, no escalation, just the question, delivered with the flat certainty of a man who already knows the answer and is giving her the opportunity to respond before he proceeds without her. She looked at him. "I don't know what you mean." "Vivian was in my study this afternoon." "Vivian has been in this house all day." "She was in my study specifically." His voice was very controlled. "And something that was in my study is not there anymore." He watched her face. "I'm going to ask you once more. What's on the drive?" "I think," Celeste said, "that you should be careful about the questions you're asking right now." Something moved behind his eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation." He stepped closer. Not threatening, exactly. Roman very rarely used physical space as a threat because he didn't need to. He used it as emphasis, as punctuation. "I have 300 people in that ballroom," he said. "People who matter. People who are here because they trust that this family is stable. If you are thinking about doing something that disrupts this family," she said. He stopped. "This family." She kept her voice exactly as quiet as his. "That's an interesting phrase, Roman. Which family are you referring to?" His jaw tightened by a fraction. She watched it happen. "Celeste, because you've been on the phone with Renata Ferraro fairly regularly for the past 2 years, and I'm trying to understand whether she's part of this family you're describing or whether you're using the word in some other sense." The room went very still. She watched him absorb it, watched the controlled surface of him manage the information, process it, begin the work of responding to it. He was good at this. He had spent a lifetime being good at this, but she had the advantage of having known it was coming, and he didn't have that advantage. And it was enough. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "It doesn't matter where I heard it. It matters to me. I'm sure a lot of things matter to you that I wasn't previously aware of." She tilted her head. "The Arden accounts, for instance. The end-of-quarter restructuring. The trustees you've been speaking to. Those all matter to you quite a bit, from what I understand." His face did something she had never seen it do in 7 years of watching it very carefully. It went blank. Not the controlled blankness of a man in command of his expression, but the sudden blankness of a man whose calculation has hit an unexpected wall and is running the problem again from the beginning. "You've been in my files," he said. "You've been in my family's accounts," she said. "I think we're past the point of discussing access." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "This is not what you think it is." "Tell me what it is then." "There are financial arrangements that are more complicated than—" "Don't." Her voice came out harder than she intended, and she didn't correct it. "Don't explain the financial arrangements to me like I'm a problem you're managing. I am not a problem you're managing. I am your wife, and I am standing in a room with you asking you a direct question, and I want a direct answer." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the closed door, the party continued. She could hear the low thrum of it, the music, the voices, the specific ambient sound of a large room full of people who believed they were somewhere important. Roman Viscari's anniversary party, proof of empire. "I made decisions," he said finally, "for the future of both organizations, decisions that required discretion." "Is she in love with you?" The blankness again. Shorter this time. Roman, is she in love with you? That's not relevant to, are you in love with her? Silence. She had not known, until this moment, how much she needed him to answer that question. She had been running on the practical infrastructure of the situation all afternoon. The recordings, the accounts, the names, the strategy. She had been keeping the personal reality at sufficient distance to function. But she was standing 2 feet from the man she had married, and she needed to hear the answer to that specific question from his mouth. He said nothing, which was, she recognized, its own kind of answer. "All right," she said. She heard her own voice and was slightly surprised by how steady it was. "All right." "Celeste, we're going to go back into that party," she said, "and we're going to behave exactly as we have been behaving, and you're going to give your toast, and I am going to stand beside you the way I always stand beside you." She picked up the expression she kept for public rooms and put it on. "And then we'll see." He caught her arm as she moved toward the door. Not hard. Firm. The grip of a man who hasn't decided yet whether what he needs is to stop her or to hold her. "The drive," he said. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. "Let go of me," she said. He let go. She walked back through the door into the corridor and then through the ballroom entrance and back into the light and the noise, and she found Vivian within 30 seconds by following the instinct that had kept them aligned for 20 years, and she moved to Vivian's side and said low and without looking at her, "He knows about the drive. Caruso told him. We move on the toast." Vivian didn't flinch. "How long?" "Whenever he does it. He always does it by 10:30. "And your father?" "Already in position." She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and held it without drinking. "There's something else." "Tell me." He didn't deny her. A pause. Just one. "Okay," Vivian said. "So we're clear on what we're doing." "We were always clear." Look, Dante Caruso found her at 10:05. She saw him coming and made no effort to avoid it. Avoiding him now would only confirm what he already suspected, and Caruso's suspicions were not something she needed active and mobile in the next 20 minutes. She let him reach her at the edge of the East Garden, where the party had spilled out under the oak tree lights, and the night air had gotten cold enough that most people were staying near the outdoor heaters. Caruso was a lean man, 51, with a face that had been broken once across the nose and had healed at a slight angle that should have diminished him and somehow didn't. He had dark eyes that moved quickly and landed slow, the specific visual rhythm of someone who processed what he saw before he gave you the information that he'd seen it. He had always been civil to her. He had always been, she understood now, civil in the way that someone is civil to an asset. "Mrs. Vescari," he said, "wonderful evening." "Dante." She offered the social version of her smile. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "Always a pleasure." He accepted a glass from a passing server and did not drink from it. "I was hoping to have a word." "Of course." "In private, perhaps." "I'm comfortable here." He looked at her. She looked back. The calculation was visible for a moment, not long, just a flicker, the moment of a man deciding how direct to be. "There's been some concern," he said, "about the security of certain materials stored in the house." "That does sound concerning," she said. "You should speak to Marco." "Marco's concern is external security." "Then perhaps you should tell me exactly whose concern this is and we can discuss it properly." He was quiet for a beat. "Roman is planning to make an important announcement this evening." "He always does." "This one is significant. There are people in that room whose confidence in the stability of this organization is foundational to a number of ongoing arrangements." His voice remained smooth, the voice of a man delivering information rather than issuing a warning, which was how he always delivered warnings. Anything that might complicate that confidence, tonight of all nights, would be a serious problem. She looked at him pleasantly. "Dante, is there something specific you'd like to say to me?" A moment, then, "I'm asking you, as someone who has a great deal of respect for what you've built here, to think carefully about tonight." "I think about tonight constantly," she said. "It's my anniversary." He studied her face for another second. He was good at this. He had been reading people for 30 years in situations where misreading them had real consequences. She gave him nothing. She had been preparing for this specific look from this specific man all evening. "Enjoy the party, Dante," she said, and she turned back toward the lights. Tasbam. At 10:19, she found her father near the bar. He was speaking to an older man she didn't recognize, and he broke off the conversation the moment he saw her face. The older man was gracious about it. Her father guided her 2 steps to the side where the music covered them. "He knows about the drive," she said. Matteo absorbed this without expression. "Does he know what's on it?" "He knows something was taken. He doesn't know the content. Or if he does, he's not certain." Caruso. "He approached me 10 minutes ago. A warning." Her father was quiet for a moment. She could see him running the numbers. Not financial numbers, but the other kind, the kind that measured momentum and timing and the specific physics of how a large public event can move from one condition to another if the right pressure is applied at the right moment. "Roman is going to move the toast earlier," he said. "If he suspects, he'll want to control the room before anything else can happen." She hadn't thought of this. She turned it over quickly. The logic of it was right. Roman in a defensive position would accelerate, not slow down. Get the public moment locked in, get the room on record as having witnessed the unity before whatever threat he'd sensed could materialize. "How much earlier?" she said. 20 minutes. Maybe less. He looked toward the ballroom entrance. "Where's Vivian?" "Inside. She has the drive." "Is the audio file accessible?" "She has it ready on her phone. The recording is clear." She watched her father's face. "Papa," the 2 names. His expression stayed level, but something underneath it moved. The specific movement of a man who has spent 40 years building trust as his primary currency and who has just been told that currency was counterfeited from inside. "I've already spoken to Berardi," he said. Berardi was his head of personal security, a man of approximately 0 sentiment and complete loyalty. "They won't be a problem tonight." She nodded. "And after?" "After is a different conversation." The pianist inside shifted to something with a faster tempo, and she heard the quality of the crowd noise change, a slight increase in volume, the particular sound of a room that was being gathered rather than simply occupied. She knew that sound. She had heard it at enough of these events. "He's starting," she said. Her father set down his glass. They moved toward the ballroom together, and the crowd opened for Matteo Arden the way crowds opened for men of his particular kind of gravity, and Celeste moved through the space behind him and found Vivian just inside the entrance, and the 3 of them took their positions in the room with the specific, unhurried deliberateness of people who know exactly where they need to be when something begins. At the front of the room, Roman Viscari had taken his place at the head of the central table. He had a glass in his hand and his captains were already oriented toward him, and the crowd was settling into the attentive quiet that preceded a toast. He looked, from where Celeste stood, exactly like what he had always presented himself as, a man at the center of his own power, composed and certain, the kind of man that rooms reorganize themselves around without being asked. He looked toward her. Across the length of the ballroom, through 140 people, his eyes found her the way they always had. With that specific accuracy, that trained precision of attention, she held his gaze. She smiled, because smiling was what she did, because she had been doing it for 7 years, because she was very good at it. He raised his glass. The room went quiet. 7 years ago, Roman began, and his voice carried effortlessly, in the way of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be heard, I made the best decision of my life. She stood perfectly still. Vivian was 2 feet to her left, and her father was 4 feet behind her, and the drive with 6 audio files was in Vivian's jacket pocket, and the room was full of every person whose understanding of what happened here tonight would determine what the next chapter of both their lives looked like. Roman was talking about loyalty. He was talking about family. He was talking about the kind of partnership that built empires, and the kind of trust that made men great. He was very good at it. She had always known he was very good at it, the particular skill of making every person in a room feel like the speech was meant specifically for them. She watched the faces of the men closest to him, and she could see it working, the specific softening that his voice produced in people, the opening of posture, the slight forward lean. He was almost at the end now. She could feel it in the rhythm, the gathering of the sentences toward a conclusion, the slight deepening of his voice that signaled arrival. To loyalty, he said, raising his glass higher. To family. And to the woman who has been Roman. Her own voice surprised her with how clean it was. No tremor, no hesitation. Just her name for him, 2 syllables, delivered into the silence of a room that had been expecting him to finish his sentence and instead heard someone else begin. Every head in the ballroom turned. Roman looked at her across the room. His glass was still raised. His face was doing the thing she had watched it do in the anteroom. The rapid, invisible recalculation, the split-second assessment of what was happening and what his options were. She watched it happen, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was not satisfaction exactly, but something adjacent to it. The feeling of a thing that has been in the wrong position for a very long time, finally moving to where it was always supposed to be. "There's something I need to say," she said, and her voice carried the same way his always had, because she had learned it from years of standing beside him. "Before we finish the toast." The room was completely silent. She began to walk toward him, and in Vivian's pocket, the drive with 6 audio files and 2 years of Roman Vescari's most private conversations was warm from being held and ready, and the room held its breath in the particular way that rooms hold breath when something irreversible is about to happen, and everyone present can feel it, but no one can yet name it. Celeste walked the length of the ballroom without hurrying. She counted 12 steps from where she had been standing to where Roman was. She was aware of every face turning to follow her, the captains, the investors, the political men, the family heads who had built careers on reading rooms exactly like this one, and who were reading it now with the full weight of their accumulated instinct. She was aware of Caruso somewhere to her right, very still. She was aware of her father behind her, also still. The stillness of a man who has made his decision and is waiting for the moment his decision becomes action. She stopped 4 feet from Roman. His glass was still raised, suspended in the air between the toast he had been delivering and whatever was coming next, and his face was giving her nothing. The full deployment of that control she had spent 7 years studying, the absolute surface of a man who had survived too many dangerous rooms to let one more shake him visibly. "You were saying something about loyalty," she said. "Celeste." His voice was a warning dressed as a pleasantry. "This isn't the moment." "I think it is exactly the moment." She looked at him and let everything she had been managing since 4:15 that afternoon come fully to rest in her expression. Not rage, not grief, something quieter and more permanent than either. "You've spent 7 years telling this room, and me, and my father, and every person who has ever sat at our table, that loyalty is the only currency that matters in this life. I believed you. For a very long time, I believed you completely." The room was a held breath. "So I think the people who are here tonight, the people you invited to witness your empire, deserve to hear what loyalty actually looks like in this house." She turned to Vivian. One look. That was all it took because they had been doing this their entire lives, communicating in the compressed language of 20 years of friendship, and Vivian understood. Vivian reached into her jacket pocket and her thumb found the file she had already queued, and she pressed play. And Roman Vescari's own voice came out of the small speaker at a volume that the silent ballroom carried to every corner without effort. "Tell me again. Tell me how it's going to be." The voice was intimate, private. The voice of a man speaking to a woman he loved, in a room he thought was sealed. The room did not move. Roman's glass came down slowly. She watched his face in the moment his own voice reached him. The only moment in 7 years she had ever seen him lose the surface entirely. The specific, unguarded instant when a man hears the thing that ends him and knows, with complete certainty, that there is no version of the next 60 seconds that goes the way he planned. She looked at him, and she did not look away, and the recording played on into the silence of a room that would never again organize itself around him the same way. There was no going back now, for either of them. The recording ran for 47 seconds before Roman moved. She counted them. She was not sure why she counted them, except that her mind needed something to do while her body stood very still in the middle of a ballroom full of people who were hearing the private voice of the most powerful man in the room come out of a phone speaker, and the counting was the only thing that kept the moment from becoming something she couldn't manage. 1. His voice on the recording, warm in a way she had not heard it be warm in longer than she wanted to measure. 2. The sound of a woman's laugh on the other end of the line, low and familiar, the laugh of someone who had heard this voice in private rooms many times before. 3. The word Celeste, spoken by her own husband in a register she had never once heard him use for her, as a qualifier, a category, a thing to be worked around. She doesn't know anything. That's why this works. At 47 seconds, Roman stepped forward and his hand came out and closed around Vivian's wrist with a force that was not violent but was absolute, the grip of a man accustomed to stopping things. "Turn it off," he said. Vivian looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at his face. She did not turn it off. "Roman," Celeste's voice, flat, close. "Let go of her." He let go. He stepped back. He was breathing through his nose in the controlled way of a man managing something that was trying to become unmanageable, and when he turned to face the room, his expression had been reconstructed with a speed that was almost impressive. Not fully, not the way it would have been an hour ago, but enough that a stranger might have read it as composure. The men closest to him were not strangers, and what she saw in their faces told her they were not reading it as composure. Enzo Falcone, who had talked about his baby with such uncomplicated pride an hour ago, was staring at Roman with his champagne glass held slightly away from his body, as if he had forgotten it was in his hand. Beside him, Gregor Hess, who ran the Eastern Territories distribution network, and who had built his professional reputation entirely on his ability to identify structural weaknesses in organizations, was very still in the specific way of a man who has just identified one. And at the back of the room, near the entrance, Celeste caught the face of a man named Silvio Mara. She had not known Silvio Mara would be here tonight. He had not been on the guest list she approved. She looked at him for 1 second, a compact man in his mid-50s with a gray beard and the patient, watchful quality of someone accustomed to waiting for the right moment. And then she looked away because looking too long at a thing you haven't planned for is how you signal that it has surprised you. She filed it. She kept moving. "That recording," Roman said to the room, and his voice was controlled, and the control itself was the problem because everyone could hear how hard it was working, "is taken out of context, completely out of context. What you're hearing is a private conversation regarding a business arrangement that—" "Roman," her voice again. She didn't raise it. "Stop." He looked at her. "The file is 8 months old," she said, to the room more than to him. "There are 5 others. The most recent is from 4 nights ago when we attended the Meridian dinner together." She let that sit for a moment. He left the table twice. Both times were about 12 minutes long. She watched the room process this. She watched Roman process the fact that she had just told the room how many files there were, which told him she had listened to more than the one she'd played, which told him the scope of what she had, and the scope of what she knew had just expanded considerably in the space of 30 seconds. She watched him recalibrate in real time, and for the first time since she had walked this room as its hostess, she felt the specific sensation of having the advantage and knowing she had it. "My wife," Roman said, and now there was something underneath his control that was closer to its actual source, not anger exactly, but the thing that anger is made of, the cold mineral of it, is upset. She has misunderstood a business relationship as something personal, and she has made the poor decision to act on that misunderstanding in front of people who deserve better than to be used as an audience for a domestic. "Her name is Renata Ferraro," Celeste said. Silence. "She's from the Milan branch of the Ferraro family. She's 34 years old, and Roman has been flying to see her 6 times a year for the past 2 years, on the weeks when he told me he was in Geneva for finance meetings." She looked at her husband. There were no finance meetings in Geneva. The room was very quiet, and then, from somewhere near the back, Silvio Mara said, "Ferraro." Not loud, almost to himself, but in a room that quiet, it carried. Celeste turned. Mara was moving through the crowd now, not toward her, but toward the center of the room, and there was something in his movement, a deliberateness, an arrival quality, like a man who has been waiting outside a door and has just heard the word that tells him it's time to come in. Roman had gone completely still. "Silvio," he said. Mara stopped in the open space between them. He looked at Roman with an expression that Celeste could not fully read from where she stood, but which she understood had a history behind it that she was not aware of. A history that had something to do with the name she had just said out loud in front of 140 people. "You want to tell me," Mara said, "what your connection to the Ferraro family looks like from where I'm standing?" Roman's jaw tightened. "This is not the place." "You made it the place." Mara's voice was quiet and absolutely without give. "When you invited me here tonight to witness a consolidation, your words, Roman, your invitation, witness the consolidation. You made it the place." "Silvio, the Ferraro family," Mara said to the room with the measured quality of a man delivering testimony, "has been making moves on the Southern Port contracts for 14 months. My contracts. The contracts that were guaranteed by the standing agreement between my organization and yours." He looked at Roman. 6 personal visits a year to Milan. Finance meetings in Geneva that weren't in Geneva. He paused. "What exactly has been discussed on those visits?" The question sat in the room like a physical object. Celeste had not known about the Southern Port contracts. She had not known Mara's organization had a standing agreement with Romans that was apparently incompatible with whatever Roman was building with Renata Ferraro's family. She had walked into this room tonight knowing she was carrying one weapon, and she had just discovered that the room contained at least one other one that she hadn't loaded. She kept her face absolutely still. Roman was looking at Mara with the specific attention of a man trying to read exactly how much the other man knows, which is a different look than the one he uses on people who know nothing, and a different look again from the one he uses on people who know everything. He was somewhere in the middle, and Roman in the middle of an information problem was the most dangerous version of him. "The Ferraro relationship is commercial," Roman said. "It has no impact on your contracts." "Has no impact," Mara repeated, "or hasn't had impact yet." "Silvio, I have been your partner for 11 years. "Oh, you have been my partner for 11 years, Mara agreed with a terrible flat civility, "and in 11 years I have never once had reason to question what you were doing in rooms I wasn't in." He glanced at Celeste, a brief, assessing look, not unkind, the look of a man revising his understanding of a person he had previously underestimated. "I'm questioning it now." Roman turned to the room. She could see him do it, could see him make the decision to expand the stage rather than contract it, to turn what was happening into something he could manage from the center of rather than the corner of. It was the instinct of a man who had built his position by never ceding the floor. "I want everyone to understand," he said, loudly enough now that the people at the edges of the room could hear clearly, "that what is happening here tonight is a private matter being made public by a woman who is the Arden accounts," Matteo said. Her father's voice, from directly behind her, quiet, precise, and landing with the specific weight of a name that everyone in this room knew, because the Arden Financial Network was the infrastructure that a third of the organizations represented here tonight ran their legitimate holdings through. It was the name that had given Roman's operation its access to international markets. It was the name that, Celeste now knew, Roman had been systematically working to absorb. Matteo Arden stepped forward. He was not a large man, and he did not need to be. The room made space for him the way it made space for things that have been standing a long time. "My daughter has brought to my attention," he said, "a series of communications indicating that certain trustees within my financial structure have been approached. Privately, with offers." He looked at Roman, "without my knowledge." The room shifted. She felt it, a physical change in the pressure of the space, the way a room feels different when the weight of authority moves from one location to another. "Those trustees have been removed from their positions as of this evening," Matteo continued. "The accounts they managed have been frozen pending a full structural review." He paused. "Every organization in this room that holds assets through the Arden network will receive formal notification by morning. There will be no disruption to legitimate holdings. The review is targeted." He was looking at Roman as he said this last part. He did not need to explain what targeted meant. Roman said, "Matteo, I am not finished." Matteo's voice did not change temperature. It didn't need to. The agreement between the Arden family and the Viscari organization has been the foundation of a significant portion of what you have built over the past 7 years. That agreement was made in good faith. It was made on the basis of a marriage that I believed represented a genuine partnership. He stopped. I was informed today that the marriage was a mechanism. I was informed today that my daughter was a mechanism. The word landed in the room and did not leave. The agreement, Matteo said, is dissolved. Roman stood very still. She was watching him, and she saw, in the space between 1 second and the next, the specific thing that happened to a man when the financial architecture of his empire is removed from underneath him in a single public sentence. Not panic. Roman would never show panic in a room like this. Something quieter and more permanent. The recognition of a structural fact. "You can't," he started. "It is already done." Matteo looked at him with an expression that was not cruel and was not warm and was exactly as final as a closed door. The paperwork was filed at 9 o'clock this evening. Celeste absorbed this. She had not known her father had filed at 9. She had told him at 8:40. He had moved in 20 minutes, which meant he had already had the dissolution drafted before she spoke to him on the terrace, which meant he had been running his own parallel assessment of Roman for longer than tonight, which meant she filed it. She kept it for later, because there were things happening in this room right now that required her full attention. Caruso moved. She caught it from the corner of her eye, a shift toward the back of the room, toward the exit corridor, subtle enough that most people in the crowd wouldn't have noticed it. She had been watching Caruso all night. Berardi, her father's head of security, was near the corridor entrance. She didn't look at Berardi. She didn't need to. Caruso stopped moving. Roman looked at Celeste, just at her. The room with its 140 people and its dissolved agreements and its Silvio Mara and his Southern Port questions and its Matteo Arden and his 9 o'clock filings fell away for a moment, and it was just the two of them, the specific geometry of a marriage in the process of being fully revealed for what it was. "You planned this," he said. "All of it. Tonight." "You planned tonight first," she said. "The drive, the recordings, your father." His voice was very quiet now, the quietness that precedes something, though she couldn't tell yet what it preceded. This wasn't a reaction. "You've been building this." "Since 4:15 this afternoon," she said. "When I was walking down a corridor in my own house carrying a piece of paper about a fish course." Something crossed his face that she had not seen before. Not the blankness of recalculation. Something older and less managed. The expression that lives underneath the architecture of a man like Roman Viscari that almost no one ever sees because he almost never lets the architecture down. Then it was gone. "There are things you don't know," he said. "Tell me one." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Vivian." She went cold. Not her name the way he usually said it. Not as a social reference, not as the name of the woman standing 2 feet to her left. The way he said it had a weight behind it, a specific gravity, as if the name itself was a piece of evidence he was presenting rather than a person he was identifying. She turned to Vivian. Vivian's face was completely still. The particular stillness that Celeste had seen on her face for 20 years in moments of difficulty. The stillness of someone keeping their expression from becoming something else. "Roman," Vivian said. Her voice was level. "Don't." "How long," Roman said, "has Vivian Cross been consulting for Silvio Mara's organization?" The question hit the room like a temperature drop. Celeste looked at Vivian. She looked at the face she had known for 20 years, the face she had read in the compressed language of their particular friendship, the face she had trusted with the drive, and with the plan, and with her father's name, and with every decision she had made since 4:15 that afternoon. "Celeste," Vivian started. "How long?" Celeste said. Vivian closed her eyes. 1 second. That 1 second told Celeste everything that the words were going to confirm. 14 months, Roman said. The same 14 months that Mara's people have been approaching my port contracts. The same 14 months that someone with access to this house and to my study's security rotation has been providing Mara's organization with detailed intelligence on my operational structure. He looked at Mara. You want to know what's been discussed in Milan? I want to know what's been discussed in this house. Mara's face had changed. He was looking at Vivian with the expression of a man whose own calculation has just hit an unexpected wall. Vivian opened her eyes. It wasn't, she said. Don't, Celeste said. Her voice was very quiet and very exact. Don't tell me what it wasn't. I was trying to protect you. From the beginning, Celeste, everything I did was, you knew about the drive location because you put it there, Celeste said. The pieces were moving into position as she spoke them, the specific click of a lock recognizing its key. Roman's encrypted drives. You knew where they were because you've been in that study before. Not today. Before. Vivian said nothing. You brought me the drive today. You handed it to me. You told me what was on it, and you told me about Renata, and you built the architecture of this entire evening. Celeste's voice was doing something she had very little control over, staying flat not from composure, but from the specific kind of shock that hasn't yet decided what emotion it becomes. Was any of it real? The recordings? Are they real? Yes. Vivian's voice, for the first time in 20 years, was something Celeste didn't recognize, stripped of its usual certainty. The recordings are real. Roman is exactly what you heard on that file. Renata is real. The account restructuring is real. I didn't invent any of it. But you knew about it before today. A pause. Yes. How long have you known? 8 months. 8 months. Celeste stood in the middle of her own ballroom with her husband's empire fracturing around her and her father's dissolution paperwork filed, and Silvio Mara recalculating his own position, and the woman who had been her closest friend for 20 years, standing 3 feet away telling her she had known for 8 months. Why tonight? Celeste said. Why did you bring it to me today? Vivian looked at her. In her eyes was something that Celeste recognized even through everything. Genuine grief, the real kind, not performed, which was almost worse. Because Mara was going to move against Roman tonight regardless, Vivian said. With or without the recordings, with or without you. He had enough intelligence to act. If he moved first, you would have been collateral. The wife of a man whose empire fell to a rival, with no agency, no position, no protection. She stopped. I brought you the recordings today so that when this happened, you were the one holding the weapon. Not Mara, not Roman. You. The room was completely silent. You used me, Celeste said. I protected you. By deciding what I would know and when I would know it. By building my evening around your timeline. By making me believe I was acting when I was being positioned. She looked at the woman she had grown up beside, the woman who had sat in the armchair that morning and asked if she had slept. That is not protection, Vivian. That is the same thing Roman did. A different direction, but the same thing. Vivian had no answer for this. Celeste could see her searching for one and not finding it, and the absence of a defense was its own kind of confirmation. Mara spoke from across the room. His voice was careful now, recalibrated, the voice of a man who has just discovered that the intelligence he's been receiving for 14 months came from a source with her own agenda. Mrs. Vescari, he said, I want you to understand that my organization's interest in the Vescari operation has nothing to do with you personally. She turned to face him. What does it have to do with? The port contracts, exclusively. And the intelligence Vivian provided. Was it exclusively about the port contracts? Mara was quiet for a moment. It broadened over time. To include. Another pause. The Arden financial structure. She looked at him. She looked at Vivian. She looked at her husband, who was watching this exchange with the expression of a man who has just discovered that the room contains more players than he mapped, which she suspected was the first time in a very long time that Roman Vescari had been genuinely surprised by something. She was standing in the center of a room where her husband had been planning to use her, Her best friend had been using her to manage a rival's power play, and a man she had never met before tonight had been receiving intelligence about her family's finances for over a year. Every person in this room had a plan for her. She was the only one who had walked in without one. She breathed in through her nose. The chandeliers above her threw their warm light down across the wreckage of the evening. The champagne glasses still full, the centerpieces in their correct shade of cream, the pianist in the corner who had stopped playing at some point without her noticing, and who was now sitting very still on his bench watching the room like everyone else. She looked at Vivian one more time. Vivian looked back at her with those 20 years between them, all of it present in the space between their eyes. All of it changed. Then Celeste turned away. She turned to face the full room. Her husband, Mara, Caruso frozen near the corridor, her father standing behind her. The 140 people who had come to witness an empire and were witnessing something else entirely. And she understood with a clarity that felt like the first completely clean thing she had felt all day, that the woman who had walked into this ballroom tonight was not going to be the woman who walked out of it. Whatever she was going to have to become to survive what came next, she was going to have to start becoming it right now, in this room, in front of every person who had ever defined her by her position beside someone else. She turned to her father first, not for permission. She was past the age of asking her father for permission, and tonight had made her considerably older than she had been this morning. She turned to him because he was the one person in this room whose position she understood completely, whose motives she could trust even when his methods ran ahead of her knowledge. He had filed the dissolution at 9 o'clock. He had moved before she asked him to. That was either a father protecting his daughter or a patriarch protecting his assets, and she had enough honesty left in her tonight to acknowledge it was probably both. He looked at her and gave her the smallest nod she had ever seen from him. It meant, "Your floor." She turned back to the room. "I want to be clear," she said, and her voice carried the way it had all evening, clean and without effort, "about what has happened here tonight. My husband planned to use this marriage to absorb my family's financial network. My closest friend withheld that information for 8 months while providing intelligence on this house to a third party. And every person in this room was invited here tonight as a witness to a consolidation of power that was built on a lie." No one spoke. "The Arden network is frozen. The Viscari alliance is dissolved. Those are facts that exist independent of anything any of us feels about them." She looked at Roman. "You built something real. I watched you build it for 7 years, and some of it was genuinely impressive, and none of that changes what you decided to do with it." Roman said nothing. For the first time in 7 years, he had nothing to say. She reached up and removed the second piece of jewelry she was still wearing. A thin bracelet, white gold, the first anniversary gift. The one she had kept on because it sat below her sleeve and she hadn't thought about it. She held it for a moment. Then she set it on the table beside her with a sound that was much quieter than the room deserved. "I'm done," she said. Not to him specifically, to the room, to the evening, to the 7 years. She looked once more at Vivian. Vivian was watching her with an expression that was grief and something else. Something that might have been, underneath everything, a form of respect. Celeste looked at it, acknowledged it, and let it go. Some things could be processed later. Some things required a distance that tonight could not provide. She walked toward the exit. The crowd moved, not because anyone directed them to, but because a room full of people who have just witnessed the complete dismantling of a power structure understands instinctively which direction the new gravity is moving. She walked through them and she did not look back. And behind her, the wreckage of Roman Viscari's greatest night settled into the specific silence of something that will never be put back together again. She made it as far as the main entrance hall before Roman caught up with her. Not physically. He didn't touch her, didn't grab her arm the way he had grabbed Vivian's wrist in the ballroom. He came around in front of her, which was worse because it required her to stop or to walk through him, and Roman Viscari, at full containment failure, was not something she was willing to walk through without knowing what she was walking into. She stopped. The entrance hall was empty except for 2 of the household staff who read the situation in under a second and found reasons to be elsewhere. The noise of the ballroom was a pressure behind the closed doors. She could feel it more than hear it, the specific vibration of a large room full of people processing something that had just changed the shape of their world. Roman looked at her. His jacket was still perfect. His tie was still straight. The surface of him was reconstructed to a degree that would have fooled most people and did not fool her. "You need to come back in there," he said. "No. Celeste, there are people in that room who are going to make decisions in the next 20 minutes based on what they just saw, and if you are not standing beside me when they make those decisions, I'm never standing beside you again." She said it without heat, without the satisfaction she might have expected to feel. It was just a fact, delivered the way facts are delivered when they have finished being contested. "That part of my life is over. Tonight ended it." His jaw moved. "You don't understand what you've set in motion. I understand exactly what I've set in motion. Mara is going to move on my port operations within the week. What happened in there gave him everything he needed. Public confirmation that my organization has internal fractures, that my financial backing is compromised, that my own house produced the intelligence he's been using against me." His voice was controlled and rapid, the voice of a man delivering a strategic briefing, which was how he talked when he was afraid and didn't want to be seen being afraid. If he moves on the ports, 3 other organizations are going to read it as an opening, not just for the ports, for everything. That sounds like your problem. It becomes your problem when the men who want my territory start calculating who has leverage over me. And the woman I was married to for 7 years has leverage over me. That is not a safe position to be in. She looked at him. She heard what he was saying, understood it as the threat it was dressed as, and the fear it actually was, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not sympathy, not exactly, but recognition. The recognition of a man who had built everything on the assumption that he was unassailable, and who was standing in his own entrance hall realizing he was not. "Then you should have thought about that," she said, "before you decided I was a mechanism." She moved around him. He didn't stop her this time. She was at the front door when Berardi appeared from the corridor to her left. Her father's man, solid and quiet, with 2 others behind him. "Mrs. Vescari," he said, "your father asks that you come with us." "Where is he?" "The East Study. He's asking for 10 minutes. She looked at the front door. The night was on the other side of it, cold and real and completely without the architecture of this house. She thought about walking through it and just continuing to walk, which was not a serious thought, but was the kind of thought that visits you when the weight of a situation reaches a certain threshold. 10 minutes, she said, and followed Berardi. Well, the East Study was a room she had always found more comfortable than Roman's. Smaller, lined with books that had actually been read, with a window that looked onto the kitchen garden rather than the formal grounds. Her father was standing at that window when she came in, and he turned when he heard her, and for a moment he was just her father. 67 years old, with the weight of the evening on his face, which was a face she had been reading her whole life, and which now showed her something she rarely saw in it. Worry. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "Celeste." The particular tone. She sat. He moved from the window and took the chair across from her and put his hands on his knees with the deliberate posture of a man preparing to say something he has been organizing for longer than tonight. "The dissolution is filed," he said. "That's done and it cannot be undone. But I need you to understand what happens next, because what happens next is not simple, and I did not have time to bring you into all of it before the evening became what it became." "You filed at 9 o'clock, she said. "I came to you at 8:40. "Yes." "You had it drafted before I told you anything." He didn't look away. "I had concerns about Roman's intentions regarding the accounts that predated tonight. I had been investigating quietly for approximately 3 weeks. What you told me on the terrace confirmed what I already suspected, but I want you to know I would not have filed solely on your account of a conversation through a door. I filed because the evidence I had gathered independently, combined with what you brought me, was conclusive." She absorbed this. "You were already moving against him." "I was already protecting the network. Those are not the same thing. From where I'm sitting, they look similar." "From where you're sitting," he said carefully, "you have had an extraordinarily difficult evening, and I understand that everything looks like betrayal right now. I am asking you to hold that feeling separate from the information I need to give you, because the information is urgent and the feeling can be processed later." She looked at her father. She thought about what Vivian had said, that she had withheld information to protect Celeste, that she had built the evening's architecture around Celeste's best interests as Vivian understood them. She thought about how that had felt to hear. She looked at her father's face and thought about how the same logic could live in very different people and produce very different outcomes, and she decided that the difference was what you did with the person once you'd protected them. Her father was looking at her directly. He was not managing her expression or her timeline. He was telling her there was more and waiting for her to be ready to hear it. "Tell me," she said. "Mara did not come tonight on my invitation," he said. "I did not know he would be here. Roman invited him, which means Roman was already planning to use Mara as a counterweight, either against me or against someone else in the room. I am not yet certain which. The fact that Vivian has been feeding Mara intelligence changes the shape of that. It means Mara came in tonight believing he had a complete picture of Roman's vulnerabilities." He paused. "He does not have a complete picture. What is he missing?" "Roman has a separate financial structure that does not run through the Arden network, has had it for approximately 18 months. It runs through 3 shell entities in 2 jurisdictions, and it is capitalized to a degree that makes the Arden network, significant as it is, not actually the foundation of his operation. It is one pillar." Her father watched her face. "He does not need the Arden accounts to survive the dissolution. He needs them to expand. Losing them hurts him. It does not destroy him." The room was very quiet. "Then tonight," she started. "Tonight hurt him publicly and significantly. It cost him alliances and it cost him credibility, and those are real costs. But the men who will move against him in the next week are going to find an organization that is damaged but not structurally collapsed. And a damaged Roman Vescari who is cornered and angry and has nothing left to protect in this marriage is a more dangerous version of him than the one you have been living with." She thought about the entrance hall, his voice, rapid and controlled, the briefing quality of his fear. She thought about what he had said. "You don't understand what you've set in motion." "He threatened me," she said. "In the hall, not directly, but the implication was that being his ex-wife makes me a target." Her father's expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. "Is he right?" she said. "He is not wrong that your position changes after tonight. The question is how we structure the change." He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to leave this house tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight, within the hour. Berardi has a location. It's been prepared for 3 days, which tells you when I began to understand that this situation was going to reach a crisis point. You will be comfortable and you will be protected, and we will manage the next phase from there." 3 days? She said. "Yes. You've been planning my exit from this house for 3 days. I have been planning your safety for 3 days. The exit is a component." She stood up. She walked to the window, the kitchen garden window, dark now, the herbs and the small beds invisible in the night. She could see her own reflection in the glass, the dress she had chosen for a party that had become something else entirely, the face that had held its expression through an evening that had required more of it than she had known an evening could require. "Vivian," she said to the window. Her father was quiet behind her. "Did you know about Vivian?" A pause. "I knew she had a secondary relationship with an outside organization. I did not know it was Mara specifically until tonight." "Did you know before I did?" Another pause, shorter, but there. "Yes." She closed her eyes. She stood at the window of her husband's house in a dress she had chosen for her anniversary party, and she let herself feel for exactly the length of time she could afford, the full weight of an evening in which every person who claimed to be protecting her had withheld something. She felt it the way you feel a physical injury, directly, completely, without management. And then she put it somewhere she could return to later, and she opened her eyes. Her reflection looked back at her. She looked older than she had this morning. She thought that was probably correct. "All right," she said. "I'll go." She turned from the window, and then the door of the east study opened without a knock, which meant it was someone who didn't feel the need to knock, and it was not Berardi. It was Dante Caruso. He came in fast, and he closed the door behind him, and he was breathing harder than she had ever seen him breathe, which meant he had been moving quickly, and which meant something had happened that required movement. His eyes went to her father first, and then to her, and then he said, without preamble, without any of the smooth civil surface he had deployed all evening, "Roman is on the phone with federal contacts." The room went very still. Whose federal contacts? Her father said. His. The ones he's been maintaining as insurance for the past 4 years. Caruso looked directly at Matteo Arden. He is offering them the Arden Network's transaction records going back 11 years in exchange for immunity and asset protection. Celeste heard her father breathe in. He has those records, Matteo said. It was not a question. He has copies. He had them copied 18 months ago when he began the restructuring plan. Caruso's voice was flat and rapid. Every transaction, every entity, every name. He stopped. Including the names that don't appear in any public filing. The names that don't appear in any public filing. She looked at her father's face and saw something she had never once seen there in 42 years of reading it. The specific, colorless expression of a man who has just seen the floor he was standing on revealed as a trapdoor. How long does he have before they respond? Her father said. He's not waiting for a response. He's uploading. Right now. From his phone. Caruso looked at him. You have maybe 15 minutes before it's out of his hands. Her father stood. He was very still for 1 second. The stillness of complete calculation, every variable running simultaneously. Then he looked at Celeste with an expression that she had never seen on his face either, and that she recognized nonetheless, because it was the expression she had seen on her own face in the kitchen garden window 30 seconds ago. It was the expression of a person who has just run out of prepared positions. We need Roman in this room, he said. Now. Before he finishes that upload. He won't come, Caruso said. He will if she asks him. Her father looked at Celeste. She looked back at him. She understood what he was asking. She understood what it meant. Walking back into whatever room Roman was in, calling him back from the edge of a decision that would destroy her father's organization and every person connected to it, using whatever remained of 7 years of marriage as a lever to buy 15 minutes. Why would he stop for me, she said. He's already lost me. Because he hasn't decided yet whether losing you was worth it, her father said. And you walking through that door gives him 30 seconds of doubt. 30 seconds is enough for Caruso's people to get to the phone. She looked at Caruso. Your people. 4 men. Already positioned. I need 2 minutes and a distraction. She thought about the entrance hall. Roman's face. The fear underneath the control, the specific quality of a man who had just watched his longest investment collapse in public and was now making the most dangerous kind of decision. The kind made from damage rather than strategy. She thought about 7 years of standing beside him and learning the precise architecture of how he moved when he was cornered. She thought about her father's face just now, the trapdoor expression. She thought about the Vivians and the Romans and the Matteos of the evening, every person who had positioned her inside their plan without asking, and she thought about what it would mean to walk back into that ballroom as a tool in one more person's plan, even her father's, even now. No, she said. Her father's expression shifted. I'll go, she said. But not as a distraction, not as 30 seconds of doubt. She looked at Caruso. Where is he? The private dining room, north corridor, 2nd floor. Is he alone? 1 man with him, Luca Ferri. Luca Ferri, she knew. She had fed him dinner at this table 6 times. He was loyal to Roman the way a structure is loyal to its load-bearing wall, completely, and only as long as the wall was standing. Get your people to the corridor, she said to Caruso. Give me 3 minutes before you move. What are you going to do? Her father said. She picked up her evening bag from the chair where she had left it when she sat down. She checked what was in it, her phone, her key card for the north gate, the small, folded document that her lawyer had messengered to the house at noon 3 weeks ago at her request, the one she had been carrying for reasons she had told herself were precautionary, and which she now understood had been her own parallel preparation running underneath her conscious planning, the part of her that had known this was coming even when the rest of her was still deciding whether to believe it. She unfolded the document. She looked at it. 31 days ago, she had signed it. It bore her signature and her lawyer's notarization, and it was a full independent financial declaration separating every asset she had brought into the marriage from every asset accumulated during it, executed under the legal framework that her father's network attorney had recommended years ago as a standard precaution, and which Roman had signed without reading carefully, because Roman had believed at the time that careful reading was something other people needed. She folded it again. She put it back in the bag. "I'm going to give him a choice," she said. "The only one he has left that doesn't end with him in federal custody or in the ground." She looked at her father. "And I'm going to give it to him as myself, not as your instrument and not as his wife, as the only person in this building tonight who has been honest about what she wanted." Her father looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, through the window, the kitchen garden was still dark, and the white lights in the oak trees were still burning, and somewhere in this house, a man she had married was making a decision that would determine what the next 10 years of a lot of people's lives looked like. 3 minutes, Caruso said quietly. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. She felt her own heartbeat in her palm against the cold metal of it. Steady, faster than usual, present in the way that a heartbeat is only present when you are paying attention to what you are walking toward. She opened the door and walked into the corridor, and the house closed around her. And somewhere above her on the second floor, Roman Vescari was holding a phone with 15 years of her family's financial history on it, and she had 3 minutes to walk up a flight of stairs and say the thing that would make him put it down. She took the stairs at a pace that was not running but was everything short of it, her hand skimming the banister without gripping it, her heels on the marble producing a sound she couldn't muffle and didn't try to. The north corridor on the second floor was lit at half the usual level. The evening staff had dimmed the secondary lighting when the party moved to the ballroom, and the result was a long hallway that felt narrower than it was, the doors on either side receding into shadow. She counted them. Third on the left was the private dining room. She could hear Roman's voice before she reached it, low, technical, the specific cadence of a man dictating information rather than conversing. Reading numbers, she realized, account strings, the kind of alphanumeric sequences that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know the architecture they unlocked, and meant everything to anyone who did. She didn't knock. She opened the door. Roman was standing at the far end of the dining table with his phone in his hand and his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the way he only ever dressed when he believed he was completely alone. Luca Ferri was by the window, and he turned when she entered, and his hand moved toward his jacket before he registered who she was, and then he went still. Roman looked at her. He didn't stop talking for 2 full seconds. Finished the sequence he was reading, a reflex of completion that she recognized as the most Roman thing she had witnessed all evening. Then he lowered the phone. "You should go back downstairs," he said. "Put the phone down, Roman. Celeste, I am not here for your father, and I am not here for Caruso." She crossed the room toward him, not fast, measured, the way you approach something that might move if startled. "I'm here because in about 90 seconds, this decision becomes permanent, and I am the only person in this building who is going to tell you the truth about what permanent looks like." He watched her come. He didn't move. "You upload those records," she said, "and you are not buying immunity. You are buying the version of immunity they give men who have already lost everything worth protecting, which means a new name in a city where nobody knows it, and a life that is not your life." She stopped 4 feet from him. "You built something real, ugly in places, but real, and you're about to trade it for survival, which is not the same thing as living, and you know that." His hand with the phone was at his side. She could see his thumb, still, not moving. "The document in my bag," she said, "is a financial separation executed 31 days ago. Every asset I brought into this marriage is already legally mine again. You cannot touch it, which means destroying my father's network buys you nothing except the federal relationship. And Roman," she looked directly into his face, "you have never once in your life trusted a federal relationship." Silence. His thumb moved. She heard the specific sound of a call being ended. He set the phone on the table. Outside in the corridor, she heard nothing, which meant Caruso's men were already there and already understood that the 3 minutes were up and the phone was down, and whatever came next was a different negotiation entirely. She looked at Roman Vescari, her husband, her adversary, the man she had spent 7 years beside in one evening dismantling. And she felt nothing romantic and nothing vengeful. Just the clean, exhausted clarity of a woman standing on the other side of something enormous that she had walked through under her own power. "It's over," she said. Not cruelly, just as the fact it was. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was not the blankness, and not the fear, and not the calculation. Something older than all of it. Then he nodded, once, the way a man nods when he has run every remaining option and found them all closed still. She stood there for 30 seconds, maybe 40, long enough for her heartbeat to come down from the place it had been, long enough for the corridor to stop feeling like a tunnel and start feeling like a hallway again. Berardi appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and she said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. The phone was down, the upload was stopped, the decision had been made, and the consequences of it would unspool across the coming weeks in ways she couldn't fully predict and had stopped trying to. "The car is ready," Berardi said. She pushed off the wall. She straightened her shoulders. She walked toward the stairs without looking back at the closed door of the private dining room, without looking back at any of it. She was done looking back tonight. The car was a black sedan, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that moved through a city without asking to be noticed. Berardi drove. One of his men sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for the entire 40-minute drive, and Celeste sat in the back with her evening bag on her lap and her shoes still on because she had not yet reached the moment where she could take them off, where the evening was far enough behind her that small physical comforts were available again. She watched the city move past the window. It was past midnight. The streets had the specific quality of very late night in a place that never fully sleeps. The restaurants closed, but the lights still on, the occasional pedestrian moving with the purposeful solitude of someone who belongs to the city at this hour, rather than just passing through it. She had lived in this city for 7 years and had seen very little of it at midnight because Roman's world operated on a schedule that was either early morning or controlled evening, never this in-between hour that belonged to nobody's plan. She thought about the phone on the dining room table, the sound of the call ending. She had not known, walking up those stairs, whether it would work. She had told herself a version of certainty because certainty was what the moment required, but underneath it had been the honest acknowledgement that she was walking toward a man who had spent the entire evening losing things, and who was therefore in the specific psychological condition where people either stop or accelerate, and she had not known which version of Roman she would find behind that door. She had found the version that still recognized a closed exit when someone described it to him clearly. That was not sentiment. That was not the remnant of their marriage reaching across the wreckage. That was Roman Viscari being, at the fundamental level, a man who understood self-preservation above every other operating principle. She had simply shown him, in the 60 seconds she had before the choice became permanent, that the choice he was making was not self-preservation. It was self-destruction wearing the mask of control. He had recognized it. That was enough. Whether it meant anything beyond that, she would not know for a long time, and she was not going to spend the 40-minute drive deciding. The safe house was not a house. It was an apartment on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district, owned through one of her father's legitimate holding entities, furnished simply and completely. The kind of place that had been prepared by someone who understood that a person arriving here would need things to function before they needed things to feel comfortable. There was food in the kitchen, actual food, not the catered excess of the estate, but ordinary groceries, bread, eggs, the components of meals that a person made for themselves. There were clothes in the bedroom closet in her size, a selection that was neither lavish nor insufficient. There was a phone on the counter that was not connected to any number Roman had ever called. She stood in the center of the living room for a moment after Berardi's men did their sweep and withdrew to the corridor. The apartment was quiet in a way the estate had never been. Not the managed quiet of a large house at 3 a.m, where silence was an absence of the machinery that was always running underneath, but actual quiet, the quiet of a space that had no machinery to absent itself from. She took her shoes off. She set them by the door and walked in her bare feet to the kitchen and stood in front of the open refrigerator for a long moment, looking at eggs and bread and a container of soup, and felt, for the first time since 4:15 that afternoon, the specific human need to eat something. She had not eaten since noon. She had been operating on the compressed fuel of adrenaline and necessity, and the forward momentum of a plan that had kept expanding beyond its original borders. And now she was standing in a borrowed kitchen at 1 in the morning, and her body was simply informing her that it required maintenance. She made toast. She ate it standing at the counter, and it was the most real thing she had done all day. The first call came at 7 the next morning. Not from her father's lawyer, a woman named Petra Solis, who spoke in the clipped, information-dense style of someone who understood that her client's time was always more pressured than her own, and who had been managing the Arden family's legal affairs for 15 years with a thoroughness that Celeste had always appreciated and now actively depended on. The federal contact Roman attempted to reach last night, Petra said, was an assistant U.S. attorney named Garfield. He and Roman have had a relationship since a tax matter 4 years ago that was resolved quietly. Garfield received the initiation of the upload before Caruso's people stopped the transmission. A pause, precise and brief. Which means Garfield knows Roman attempted contact and has approximately 40% of the account transaction records. Celeste was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee she had made herself, wearing clothes from the closet that fit correctly, which she was choosing to take as evidence that her father's people had been thorough. 40%, she said. What does 40% buy him? Enough to open an inquiry, not enough to prosecute. The records he has are the upper-tier transactions. They show movement but not origin, which means they're suggestive without being evidentiary. Petra's voice was neutral. However, if Roman chooses to complete the transmission voluntarily, the picture changes substantially. Would he do that? That depends on what he's offered in return. Garfield will contact him, probably today. A pause. Your father wants to be ahead of that contact. What does that mean? It means the Arden network has its own relationship with certain federal offices that is cleaner and longer standing than Roman's. It means your father's attorney, which is me, has already placed a call this morning that establishes the Arden family's position as a cooperating entity in any potential inquiry, which is a very different legal posture than being a subject of one. Celeste set down her coffee cup. She looked at the table. My father is going to cooperate with a federal inquiry. Your father is going to define the terms of his own narrative before Roman defines them for him. This is not cooperation in the investigative sense. This is the management of a legal exposure through the strategic presentation of selected information. Petra said this the way a person describes the weather, accurately and without moral inflection. The result, if it proceeds as projected, is that the Arden network's legitimate holdings are protected. Certain historical transactions are covered under cooperation agreements, and Roman Vescari is left in the position of having a federal contact who received a partial transmission from him last night, and who will be receiving a much more comprehensive briefing from our side this morning. Celeste was quiet for a moment. And Roman's options narrowed significantly when Caruso's people took the phone. He is currently at the estate. He has not left. His lawyers arrived at 6 this morning. Petra paused. He has not attempted to contact you. She absorbed that. She was not sure what she felt about it. Not relief exactly. Not disappointment. Something more neutral. The recognition of a man assessing his remaining positions, which did not, in this particular morning, include her. What do I need to do? Celeste said. Nothing today. Stay where you are. The next 72 hours are going to be managed at a level that does not require your direct involvement, and your father believes, and I agree, that your physical distance from the estate and from Roman during this period is both legally advisable and personally necessary. And after 72 hours, Petra said, we begin the divorce filing. On the second day, her father came. He arrived at 10 in the morning without Berardi, which meant he had decided this was a personal visit rather than a strategic one, though with Matteo Arden the line between those two things had always been thinner than it appeared. He was wearing a suit that was slightly less formal than his usual, which for him was still more formal than most men managed for important occasions, and he carried 2 coffees from a place she recognized as being 3 blocks from the apartment, which meant he had walked. She let him in. She made no comment on the coffees. They sat at the kitchen table, and for the first several minutes neither of them said anything, which was something they had always been able to do. Sit together in silence without the silence becoming a problem. It was one of the things she had carried from her childhood that she had never found with anyone else, not even Vivian, that particular quality of shared quiet. "Petra briefed you," he said, eventually. "Yes. The federal situation is being managed. Garfield has been redirected. Roman's transmission is incomplete, and the Arden Network's position is formalized." He held his coffee in both hands. "We are in a defensible place." "I know." He looked at her. "You're angry with me." She thought about denying it. "Yes. For the 3 days. For the 3 days. For not telling me what you knew about Roman's separate financial structure. For using the dissolution as leverage in your own parallel negotiation without telling me that's what you were doing." She looked at him directly. "I walked into that ballroom last night believing I understood the shape of the evening, and the shape was considerably more complicated than what I'd been given." He nodded. He didn't defend it. She had expected him to defend it, had half prepared for the defense, the explanation of why his judgment about what she needed to know had been correct, the patriarch's rationale. Instead, he just nodded, and the absence of the defense was disarming in a way the defense would not have been. "I have been protecting you since before you could protect yourself," he said. "That is not an excuse." "I know it is not an excuse. It is an explanation of the reflex, which I understand is different." He set down his coffee. "You handled last night. You handled it better than I would have handled it at your age, and better than most people I have known would have handled it at any age. The phone, the stairs, Roman." He looked at her. "I did not give you the complete picture because I did not believe you needed it. I was wrong." She sat with that for a moment. "I needed it," she said. "I know. Not because I couldn't function without it. I obviously could, but because—" She stopped, finding the right words, the exact ones. Because the exact ones mattered here. "Because the decisions I make about my own life have to be made with complete information, not filtered information, not the information someone else has decided is sufficient." She looked at her father. "Roman filtered what I knew about my own marriage for 7 years. I need the people I trust to understand that I cannot survive another version of that, even a well-intentioned one." Her father looked at her for a long time. Something in his face was doing the same thing she had seen the night before. That movement beneath the surface, the acknowledgement of something that was not easy to acknowledge. "You have my word," he said. It was not a small thing from Matteo Arden. She knew that, and she accepted it as what it was. "Now tell me about the separate financial structure," she said. He told her. It took 40 minutes and 2 more coffees and a level of technical detail that required her to ask clarifying questions twice, and by the end of it, she had a complete picture of Roman's actual financial position. The shell entities, the capitalization, the jurisdictions, and the complete picture was both better and worse than the partial picture had suggested. Better because Roman was not actually the cornered, desperate figure she had half imagined at the top of those stairs. Worse because it meant he had resources that would allow him to reconstitute something, over time, in a form that didn't require the Arden Network or the alliances he had lost last night. "He'll build again," she said. "Probably. In a diminished form. The credibility damage from last night is real and lasting. The men who were in that ballroom will not forget what they witnessed. And in the world Roman operates in, witnessed weakness has a long half-life." Her father shrugged slightly. "But yes, he will find a way to continue." "With Renata?" "That I don't know." She thought about that. She had not thought about Renata Ferraro since the ballroom, had set her aside as a detail that belonged to the emotional architecture of the situation rather than the strategic one. Now she allowed herself to think about her for a moment. A 34-year-old woman from the Milan branch of a significant family who had spent 2 years in a private relationship with a married man who had described his wife through a closed door as the key to unlimited power. Whatever Renata Ferraro was, she was also a person who had been receiving a version of Roman that Celeste now understood was the version he was capable of when he allowed himself to want something. That was its own kind of information about him. She filed it and let it go. "The divorce," she said. "Petra will file in 3 days. Roman's lawyers have been informed. There will be no contest on the financial separation. The document you had prepared gives you a clean position, and he knows it, and contesting it would require him to open discovery processes that serve neither of his current interests. Her father paused. It will be clean, as these things go. As these things go. 7 years, and it would be clean. She nodded. She looked at the kitchen table, the ordinary surface of it, the coffee rings from this morning, the specific unremarkable reality of a Tuesday in a borrowed apartment, and she felt the weight of the word clean, what it cost to arrive at it, what had been spent in the earning of it. "Papa?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going back to the estate." "I know. I'm not going back to any version of the life I was living, the social structure, the events, the position beside whoever is at the center of it." She looked at him. "I want to do something with the Arden name that doesn't require me to stand behind it. Something where I'm in front of it." He studied her. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet. Something real. Something that I build." She paused. "I've been watching people build things my entire adult life. I know how it works. I know the architecture of it better than most people who are actually doing it." She met his eyes. "I want to use what I know." Her father was quiet for a moment. Then something happened in his expression that was neither the patriarch nor the strategist, something simpler and older than either. "Tell me when you're ready," he said, "and I'll open every door I have." On the 4th day, Vivian called. Celeste looked at the phone for 4 full rings before she answered it. She had not decided in the preceding days whether she was going to answer. She had not decided whether she was ready for the conversation, or whether ready was even the right framework, whether some conversation simply had to happen before readiness was available, because waiting for readiness was its own kind of avoidance. She answered on the 5th ring. "I'm not calling to explain myself," Vivian said. Her voice was different from the version Celeste had heard in the ballroom, stripped of the event night tension, lower, carrying something that was not comfortable but was at least honest. "I know there's nothing I can say that makes it a different thing than what it was." "Then why are you calling?" "Because you are my oldest friend and I caused you harm, and I needed you to hear me say that directly." A pause. "Not to fix it, just to say it." Celeste stood at the apartment window. The financial district was moving below her. The ordinary mid-morning traffic of a city that had not attended a party 4 nights ago and did not know that the shape of several significant things had changed while it was going about its business. 14 months, Celeste said. "Yes." "Did you know when you first approached Mara that it would lead to last night? A silence that was longer than a denial would have required. I knew it would lead to something. I didn't know the specific shape." Another pause. "I knew Roman was going to do what he did to you. I had known for 8 months. And I knew that the only way to protect you from it was to ensure that when it happened, you were holding the weapon and not standing in the path of someone else's. You could have told me 8 months ago. You would have left quietly," Vivian said. "You would have taken the private negotiation and the clean exit, and you would have let him keep his credibility and his alliances and his public position, and he would have gone on to the next version of this with the next person, and nobody in that world would have understood what he actually was." Her voice was level. "I know you, Celeste. I know what you do when you're hurt and you think no one is watching. You contract, you protect, you choose clean over true." The accuracy of it landed with a specific discomfort. "That was my choice to make," Celeste said. "I know. You took it from me, the same way he did, with the best possible intentions and the most careful planning and the absolute certainty that you understood what I needed better than I did." She kept her voice even. "That is not friendship, Vivian. That is management." "I know," Vivian said again. And then, "I don't have a defense. I want to be clear that I'm not offering one. I'm telling you what I understood at the time, because I think you deserve to understand the full shape of what happened, and then I'm going to let you decide what this is between us now." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the city below. She thought about 20 years of a friendship that had been real, that she had trusted with things she had trusted with no one else, that had been the constant reference point of her adult life. And she thought about what it meant that even that had contained a layer she hadn't known about, a parallel calculation running underneath the surface of it. She thought about the word management, which she had used, and about what it meant to manage someone you loved versus what it meant to protect them, and about whether the difference was always as clear as she had made it sound. She thought about her father saying, "I have been protecting you since before you could protect yourself," and about the way she had responded to that, and about what it would mean to apply a different standard to Vivian than to him. She thought for a long time. "I don't know what this is between us now," she said finally. "I think that's an honest answer, and I think it's the only one I have." "That's enough," Vivian said. "That's more than I expected. Don't call me for a while." "Okay." "But," she stopped, started again. "Don't disappear." A silence. Then, quietly, "Okay." She ended the call and stood at the window for a long time after. Kids. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. It took less time than average because both parties' legal representatives had arrived at an agreement that served both parties' primary interests. Celeste's assets were cleanly separated, Roman retained his remaining operational structure without the Arden Network's involvement, and the terms included a non-disclosure framework that was, in Petra's words, aggressively mutual. Neither of them could speak publicly about the events of the anniversary party or the circumstances of the dissolution. Celeste had asked Petra whether she could live with that. Petra had said, "The people who were in that ballroom know what happened. Non-disclosure agreements apply to public statements, not to the memory and judgment of 140 witnesses. The story is already told. The agreement just determines who tells it in what format going forward." That was enough. She signed on a Tuesday in Petra's office, in a building 3 miles from the estate that she had not returned to and did not intend to return to. The signing took 11 minutes. Afterward, she sat in the chair across from Petra's desk and felt the specific, non-cinematic reality of the moment. Not triumphant, not devastated, not any of the large emotional categories that she had expected the end of a marriage to occupy. Just present. Just in the chair, with the pen still in her hand, in a Tuesday afternoon in an ordinary office, on the other side of something enormous. "That's it," Petra said. "That's it," Celeste agreed. She found the office space 6 weeks after that. It was on the 9th floor of a building in the northern part of the city, in a neighborhood that was in the early stages of becoming something different from what it had been. The specific urban condition of a place where older infrastructure is beginning to coexist with newer intention, where a restaurant that has been there for 40 years sits next to a design firm that has been there for 18 months, and both of them are doing reasonable business. She liked that about it. She liked that it was a place in transition, because she understood transition better than she had before, and because she thought it was the right environment for the kind of work she was planning. The work was financial consulting, not criminal. She had spent enough time in that architecture to understand its structure completely and to want nothing further to do with it personally. Legitimate financial consulting, the kind that used her understanding of how money moves through complex organizational structures to help smaller entities, nonprofits, emerging businesses, family companies navigating succession, manage their resources with the same sophistication that large organizations took for granted. She had the knowledge. She had the name, which meant something in certain rooms and nothing in others, which was a ratio she found she preferred to the version where it meant something everywhere. She had the financial separation document, which meant she had capital, and she had the particular quality that 7 years beside Roman Vescari had given her without intending to: the ability to read a room, understand what every person in it was protecting, and identify the structural weakness before it became a crisis. It turned out those were marketable skills outside the context of organized crime. Her father offered to fund the first year's operating costs. She thanked him and declined and took a loan from a bank like a civilian, and she understood that was a small thing, but it was hers. She saw Roman once, in the months that followed. Not by arrangement, in the lobby of a hotel where she was meeting a client and where he was apparently meeting someone she didn't recognize, a man in a good suit who had the careful posture of a person being evaluated. Roman's operation, reduced and reorganized and relocated to a different part of the city, was still functioning. She had heard this from people who tracked such things. He had not been charged with anything. The federal situation had resolved in the way her father's intervention had designed it to resolve, with neither Roman nor the Arden network as primary subjects of inquiry, and with the Ferraro family's port ambitions stalled by the public attention the anniversary party had generated. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. They were 40 feet apart, across a marble lobby, in the middle of a workday, and they looked at each other for the length of time it takes to confirm that you are seeing what you think you are seeing, and to register that the other person has seen you too. He nodded. Once. The way a man nods at something he has accepted. She nodded back. Then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 14th floor and watched the lobby door close, and Roman Vescari was on the other side of it, and that was the last time she saw him. In November, 5 months after the anniversary party, she hired her first employee. He was 26 years old and had an accounting degree and the specific quality of someone who had learned his field because he was genuinely interested in it rather than because it was practical, which in Celeste's experience was the difference between someone who was competent and someone who was eventually excellent. His name was Daniel, and on his first day she showed him the office, the 900 square feet of it, the 2 desks, the window that looked north toward the part of the city that was in the process of becoming something new. And she explained what they were going to do there, and he listened with the attention of someone who understood that the work mattered. One question, he said when she finished. Go ahead. The Arden name, is it going to be a problem for some clients? Given... He stopped, clearly uncertain how to finish the sentence. She thought about it honestly. For some, she said, yes, and for others it's going to be a reason they call us first. I've decided I can live with both. He nodded. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop and began the ordinary work of beginning, and Celeste sat at her own desk and did the same. And outside the window, the city moved through its November afternoon without ceremony, and the office was quiet in the way that a space is quiet when what fills it is not the absence of noise, but the presence of something being built. She had lost a marriage and a best friend, at least for now, and a version of herself she had worn so long she had stopped feeling its edges. She had spent 7 years learning the architecture of power from a man who had seen her as a component of it. She had walked up a flight of stairs in an evening dress at midnight and changed the outcome of an evening that 3 separate people had designed without her full consent. She had sat in a borrowed kitchen at 1 in the morning and made toast and eaten it standing up, and that had been the most real thing she had done in longer than she could account for. She opened the first client file. She read the first page. She made a note in the margin, a small, precise note, in her own handwriting, in her own office, on an ordinary Tuesday in November, and she felt the specific, unspectacular, completely irreplaceable sensation of a life that was finally simply hers.